more than 59,000 net new jobs created in the month of November. The unemployment rate down by 0.2% to the lowest level that it's been at since the Great Recession of 2008-2009. As I say, this augurs well for jobs, growth, and prosperity in Canada.
Canadian Finance Minister Jim Flaherty thumping his chest about higher than expected Canadian job creation, 59,300 jobs in November, with the bulk of hiring coming in full-time positions and in the private sector. Multiple signs of a healthy economy in the Great White North. Now, our friends to the south could easily be encouraged by their own jobs numbers if they don't take a good look at them. U.S. employment grew faster than expected in November, the jobless rate falling to 7.7% last month, lowest since December of 2008. One could easily see signs that the American economy was gaining momentum, but people need to read between these lines. We're not here to fearmonger. We're here to inform, to set things straight. Those positive numbers can be deceiving, as big brains like Mark Stein will tell you. Many of America's economic troubles are what they call systematic. They can't be fixed on their own. When working Santas can't find a job during Christmas time, you know America needs an injection of Canadian common sense. America's jobless rate, 7.7%, lowest in 4 years. Seems great on the surface. But it's not great news because of why it got to 7.7. Because more and more people are dropping out of the labor force altogether and no longer even getting their heads counted in the unemployment line because they're not even there. In November, another 350,000 people stayed home and collected social assistance. They've given up hope. If all those people were actually looking for work, official unemployment would be far higher. A better metric is the U6 indicator, which measures the underutilized labor force. Able-bodied people who are only working part-time or not at all. That one is 14.6%. And that includes the working Santa. Yes, Santa Claus coming to town. Needs a job. Santa's struggling. There's no official Kris Kringle employment index, but agencies across America are reporting that the job prospects for St. Nick are hopeless. Not only are there more people trying to become Santa for part-time work, there are fewer opportunities to don the red and white costume and spread some Christmas cheer because these are private sector Santas, not government subsidized ones. So as I said earlier, most of Canada's job creation in the past month, Canada's, came from the private sector. These are real jobs creating real wealth, unlike government jobs, which are an expense of tax dollars. And that's the scary thing about the U.S. economy right now. 73% of new jobs created in the past 5 months, government jobs. 3 out of every 4, government jobs, public service jobs, public sector jobs. You can't have the government propping up the entire economy. That's called grease. And this situation becomes more dire when you're looking over that fiscal cliff. With $600 billion in automatic tax hikes and government spending cuts starting in the new year, something that hurts both real job creation in the private sector and fake job creation in the public sector. Look, I'm not trying to claim that Canada is the ultimate model for small government. We've got a great big debt burden here as well. But America is allowing the government to become the economy. And that's not the road to recovery and prosperity. That is the road to Greece. And that is Canadian common sense. Ho, ho, hopeless. U.S. jobs numbers for November coming in better than expected, but the numbers can be misleading. Things not as rosy as they seem. It's time for some Martosko Monday. Joining us now from the Daily Caller, David Martosko. David, let's do the jobs numbers first. And the job numbers, technically, the unemployment rate's down to 7.8, which is awfully, better than 9, which is where it was when Obama first took over at the height of the recession and all of that. But talk to us a little bit about the misleading, and that has to do with the amount of people now on disability, the labor participation rate, and all the rest of it.
Well, I think the first thing you have to understand is that the percentage of grown-up, adult-age Americans who could be in the workforce is now less than 65%. That's the lowest in almost 30 years. And the vast majority of the jobs added in November, about 73%, were added in the public sector, in government. And while the federal government hiring is way up, local governments are down by a few thousand. So most of the jobs that we're seeing created in November that contribute to this decrease in the unemployment rate are federal government jobs. So essentially what you have is Barack Obama and his administration borrowing tons of money from the Chinese to create literally jobs out of thin air, hire government workers to lower that official unemployment rate. And even worse, if you include, and this is always the secret sauce in the unemployment numbers, if you include people who are part-time employed for economic reasons and people who have just dropped out of the workforce because they've given up, add those into the mix, and we're at an unofficial unemployment rate of 14.4%, which is really just disgusting from my point of view. If that were the number that people publicized instead of 7 point whatever percent, we would have rioting in the streets. People talk really despairingly about cities like Detroit being in the upper teens for unemployment without realizing that the United States in general is in the mid-teens, and that's almost never reported.
The figure I take most seriously is labor participation. Second most seriously, private sector job growth. Private sector job growth is an absolute abomination. If you can't have private sector job growth, you can't have real economic growth. The rest is a mirage. Is it about the fiscal cliff, David Martosko? Why are the people involved in the private sector who have capital not deploying that capital, not putting the capital to work to hire people?
I think more than the fiscal cliff, it's about the impending threat of new health care costs. With Obamacare's new health care mandate for employers, they just don't want to hire people until they have a good handle on what it's going to cost them to hire. Small businesses drive the economy in the United States, and for small businesses with fewer than 50 employees, growing past 50 employees means they have to participate in these healthcare exchanges and take on all kinds of new costs. So yes, the fiscal cliff is an issue, but you can plan on that because there's a fixed number. You know exactly what it'll cost you to return to the Bill Clinton era tax rates, go up to the marginal rate of 39.6%. What you don't know is exactly what those Obamacare costs will be, and it's the uncertainty, not the increase in costs, that's driving that decrease in private sector growth.
David, all of the focus has been on what I think of as a major distraction, tax rates on the upper end. The real story that doesn't seem to be getting told is how there doesn't seem to be any consensus on cutting entitlements, Medicare, Social Security, what have you. And that's the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room. Is there any chance of any agreement on entitlement reform between now and Christmas?
Oh, no chance at all. The Democrats are not going to budge on that. If anything, they're looking for more spending on entitlements. They seem intent on driving us into bankruptcy. They're in denial, covering their eyes and their ears and saying, la, 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 la. I don't want to listen to this. Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor, came out this morning and said we should be borrowing more money because the cost of borrowing is so low. It's absolutely sick what they're doing. I think the Republicans almost have to say, let's take us over the cliff so that we spend less money in some fashion. They know they're not going to get entitlement reform. So if it requires us cutting our Defense Department, cutting some discretionary programs just to get us somewhere in the neighborhood of solvency, they're going to have to do that. But Social Security, Medicare costs are going to continue to spiral upward until someone just smacks us in the head and says, hey, guess what? You're Greece. Until then, our government is so intransigent, especially on the left side of the aisle, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
All right, David, our federal government, the Harper government, has made a big decision, that is to allow the Chinese state-owned company known as CNOOC to own a significant chunk of Alberta energy infrastructure, buying a company called Nexen. We've talked about this before. It's a done deal now. It's something Americans would not have done, I don't think, in the United States, allowing the Chinese to own a piece of U.S. energy infrastructure. But do you think it'll make a difference as far as U.S.-Canadian relations go, and specifically the U.S. buying oil from Canada?
I think the only place that might make a difference is in the rhetorical arguments around the Keystone XL pipeline. Somebody in the environmental fringe will say, oh, here's another reason not to approve it. The Chinese will have a stake, yada, yada, yada. But in the real world of energy buying and all that, I don't think Americans give much of a hoot about where that oil is coming from, as long as it's not coming from Iran or Saudi Arabia, as much as it can possibly be helped. Look, the Chinese just this morning have purchased right from underneath us the plane leasing side of the AIG business. They've just bought a major battery manufacturer that the United States has been subsidizing to the tune of over $500 million. The Chinese are buying up assets. They're paying cash for them because they're cheap. It's just like the Japanese doing in the 1980s where they bought, the Rockefeller Center and all kinds of real estate in New York City. The big difference is that the Japanese overpaid for it and took a huge bath on it eventually. Chinese are buying it cheap. They're buying it for cash. They're going to be doing it all over the world. This is part of the consequence of when we owe the Chinese $1 trillion. They have lots of leverage. We can't exactly stand up and say, hey, guys, don't do it. I don't think Canada's in a position to turn down the money either. So it's not going to make a big difference for us in terms of where we buy our oil from. We'd much rather have it from Canada by way of China than have it from Russia by way of Iran. It's just a much better choice for us, and we're going to keep doing it.
It's interesting. Investors talk about how alternate energy, green energy in the States is a bad investment because the Chinese are so much more competitive, like the battery business. And now the Chinese are adding insult to injury by buying what little battery business the Americans have been able to actually put together. It's just amazing how inefficient it is, especially when you talk about a battery business that's been heavily subsidized by American money now being bought up at fire sale prices by the Chinese.
Yeah, just wait until they start buying our wind turbines and our hydroelectric dams. Then we'll have no choice. And I think even the Natural Resources Defense Council will just throw up its hands and say, fine, just keep the lights on. We don't care how you do it.
David Martosko, thank you so much.
Anytime, Charles.
David Martosko, exec editor of a tremendous site, which we use all the time. dailycaller.com. We want to hear from you on this or any of the topics. Be a citizen of Adler Nation. Send email, charlesadler@sunmedia.ca. Read them all. Your opinions matter to us a lot.